Hello, and thank you for joining us for Comic Art Review. I'm Adam Rapp, and I'm joined with Sandy Plunkett. And today we've got a treat for you, the art of Mark Bagley. Today we're going to be looking at the art of Mark Bagley. Here we can see the finished piece that we're going to be reviewing and Sandy's going to be discussing in a minute. This comes from the issue Ultimate End number 1. Now some of you may be familiar with the Ultimate series, which was a retake on some of our classic heroes. And we can see in the finished colored piece that was actually used in the issue, we can see a wide array and a broad cast of characters, including Iron Man, Scarlet Witch, Spider-Man, Nick Fury, etc. Now, many of you may be asking, who is Mark Bagley? Well, Mark was born in 1957. When he was 27 years old in Marietta, Georgia, a friend convinced him to try for the 1983 Marvel tryout book. Now, Mark beat several thousand other artists to be selected as the winner. After several months, he approached Jim Shooter at a comic book convention to be given a shot to try out his artwork. Now, we might be familiar with Mark from his more recent work in his creation of Carnage, his work in Venom, The Ultimates, etc., where he's had a great impact, but he really got his start much earlier on. One of his earlier works we can see here. Mark had his earliest shot in the New Universe series in Marvel, and this issue in Night Mask. Now, if this artwork might look familiar to you, there's a reason. Mark actually had an opportunity to work with our very own Sandy Plunkett. In this issue, Sandy was the writer, where we can see Mark was a penciler in one of his earliest comic book attempts. Now, Mark has come a long way since then, and I'm going to let Sandy dive in deeper into this current page and talk a little bit about the artwork.
Okay, guys, my turn to dig in here. Now, this page is a little different from the other ones we've been reviewing because Mark Bagley is largely a penciler, and when his work appears in Marvel and DC comic books and other places, he has someone else inking his work. What that means in terms of this analysis is that we really won't have a chance to look at the surface of his work. And by surface, I mean the way he might render, the way he might light a scene, because these things really do vary with the inker. The inkers really have a lot of influence on how the finished work looks. I'm going to juxtapose this page with an earlier page that Mark did, and it is one which you've already seen. Adam used it in his introduction. It's from his first story that he did for Marvel, inked by Ernie Chan. Excuse me. You can see how vastly different it is. You should know that there's a number of years separating these two pages, which means Bagley had a chance to mature. But even taking that into consideration, you can see how different the feel is. The one on the left there is much more slick, more the conventional type of inking that you're used to seeing. Ernie Chan has a very textured feel to his work, and if you didn't know better, you could almost think it was another inker. So what we're going to do, instead of looking at the aesthetics of the page, is to look at the storytelling. And here, for this particular page, Mark is faced with what many superhero artists are faced with on occasion, which is pages which are nothing more than dialogue. That presents a problem. You can have a page with a dialogue which is just very visually stagnant, and you really don't want that in a book that's selling itself as an action book. So there are many techniques that an artist could use, and here in these two tiers of the page which we're examining, you see Mark using camera angles to give you a sense of variety. On the top panel, it's a slight down view, and these are useful not only for variety, but because you get to see the group very well. If it was just at eye level, you would get a greater sense of crowding. Drop down to the next tier, and you'll see that on the first panel, Mark has moved his camera down, so you're looking up on those characters. It has a nice dramatic quality to it. Go over to the next two panels, and we're eye level. go over to the fourth, and we're looking up at the characters again. This gives you a really nice sense of variety and some sense of dramatic use of camera work. Before we leave Mark's work and look at some other artists and how they approach storytelling on dialogue pages, another quick look at Mark's approach. You can see he's using similar techniques, moving his camera around. On the first panel, it's an up shot. We have a couple eye level and then another down shot. Here, it's not strongly dramatic, but it helps create a sense of movement, and it helps give a visual variety. We're going to do 3 pages now of artists who work for independent publishers. That's not quite the right word, because this one by Jamie Hernandez was published by Fantagraphics, which is a pretty big company. But what characterized these 3 artists that I've chosen to look at is that their work it doesn't have a lot of fantasy. It tends to be heavy on character. I think you can notice right here with this Love and Rocket page that the camera is not moving. It is at eye level at the beginning and is at the eye level at the end. Jamie Hernandez, the artist and writer, is concentrating much more on character development, and he is allowing the writing to carry it. Hopefully, I believe he was thinking hopefully that the reader would be so involved in the dialogue that he wouldn't have to have a great deal of visual variation, that the reader wouldn't feel any lack of that. Here's a page from an artist called, and I always have trouble with his name, Adrian Tomine. That's at least how you spell it. That would be the phonetic pronunciation if you're saying it. Now that I've gotten you aware of camera angles, you can see that he is not varying the camera angle at all. It's keeping it eye level, and it's not even going in and out, close and far. All of this is pretty much medium distance. And the last of 3 pages is by Joe Sacco from his graphic novel Palestine. You can see that he is doing the same thing as the other 2, keeping the camera level. And I'm going to take a quick guess here as to why there's such a difference between how superhero artists approach it and how the artists approach storytelling, especially on dialogue pages, who are doing it for the independent or more reality-based books. One friend offered a theory that they wanted to keep you feeling as though you were in the room talking to these characters, or at least listening to these characters talk, and not make you aware of the camera at work. This doesn't really work for me. I miss the dramatics of the movement of the camera. There's another theory, which is that they just don't have the ability to move the camera. Their drawing ability isn't quite up to that. That's kind of a cynical view, but I'm sure there are other theories available. And before we leave this particular examination entirely, one last look at Mark Bagley's work. And the reason I chose this is that I think it makes a strong juxtaposition to the other pages. Here again, we're using a camera that's moving in and out a good deal. We're using blacks for dramatic purposes, which the other 3 artists didn't. And there, in a nutshell, you know why, you get to see why there's such a difference between the more art-oriented pages of a superhero book and the more writerly oriented pages of the independent books. And there it is. Talk to you next time.